Good evening, everyone. It is a delight to have you all here. Today, for our Economics, Finance, and Entrepreneurship EFE session, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Manoranjan Sharma. He is currently the Chief Economist at Infomerics Ratings and a former Chief Economist at Canara Bank. With over 3 decades of leadership in banking and finance, Dr. Sharma has played a pivotal role in shaping strategic vision, driving growth, and mentoring teams at the highest levels. He's a PhD in economics from Lucknow University, and his research spans banking, SMEs, innovation, and economic reforms. He has authored landmark books like Global Financial Meltdown and Dynamics of Indian Banking, and has over 250 publications appearing in leading journals and newspapers worldwide. His work is housed in prestigious libraries such as Harvard, Oxford, and the Library of Congress. Globally recognized as an authority in finance and development, Dr. Sharma has delivered keynote addresses at premier institutions across India. Please join me in warmly welcoming Sir. Sir, the stage is all yours. We're very excited for your session.
Thank you very much, Kritika. Am I audible, Kritika?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Oh, thank you very much. It's always a delight and a pleasure to be with you on this, all of you on this important platform. Kritika has been very kind to give me 1 hour, so I will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we will have some Q&A for about 15 to 20 minutes. Now, the topic I've been asked to speak on is a macroeconomic and trade policy perspective in the context of Trump's tariffs. The US announcement was quite brutal and blunt that from August 27, 2025, every Indian export landing in America will have to pay a tariff of 50%. Now, this was ostensibly imposed because of India's purchase of Russian oil and arms. How will it affect the Indian economy? This has caused something like, if I may use a strong word, a sledgehammer blow to the world's fastest growing major economy. And it also, in certain ways, amounts to a reckless gamble with one of America's most important strategic partnership, a partnership which has been built very carefully, painstakingly over the last few decades. Now, let me come to highlight the situation for America itself, what I prefer to call it theater, the theater of the absurd. The US, we have done some kind of an internal exercise in this on this issue, and we find that US GDP is likely to fall by 40 to 50 basis points. Inflation could rise by 2%, and the currency faces a greater risk of downgrade than compared to India. US tariffs are projected to cost the average US household about 2,400 in the short term, mainly due to higher prices from tariff driven inflation. Low income families may lose around $1,300, and some household in the higher income bracket may face a loss of something like 5,000 US dollars. Now, why is this important? Why should we discuss it today? So, let me do some kind of a number crunching. With almost 30% of total global spending and about 5 trillion in stock of foreign direct investment, FDI, which is the largest globally, the US remains the pivot of the global economy. If I may use a little colorful words, it continues to be the maker and shaker of the global economy. And Trump's promise of MAGA, making America great again, is making the world again. There is some kind of a theoretical basis. I may refer to a book by Robert Lightzer, who wrote a book in 2023 called No Trade is Free. So he strongly argued for free trade rather than, he argued for fair trade instead of free trade, since the uninterrupted play of market forces, what Adam Smith called, the father of economics, called the invisible hand, this hurt American strategic interest. This marked a tipping point in global trade relations characterized by protectionism, bilateralism, and strategic decoupling. What is interesting here for us at this stage is that such an ill conceived measure is not in the interest of the US. I gave you some evidence at a granular level. Now, if you look at things in a macro perspective, we find that America underwent a difficult period. Some of you who have some background in economics, finance, banking, other things would know that America went through a very difficult time, harrowing times in 1929, 1930, popularly called the Great Depression. So, in this kind of a thing, there was one important act, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which was ostensibly brought about to improve the American macroeconomy, but ultimately it ended up in worsening things. This is quite similar to what has been called all over the world as the Cobra effect. Uh, Cobra effect has some significance in India, like, for example, under the British rule, the Britishers were quite had a difficult time because of the menace of cobras all over the country. So they awarded hefty prizes for people who catch cobras. Now, in principle, this was sound, but in practice, this led to rearing of cobras, and the result was quite the opposite of what they desired. So sometimes this kind of a cobra effect works in diverse ways. And President Trump has always made a strong case of America first foreign policy. But perhaps he would have done well to realize that the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. In other words, as students, as teachers, as academicians, as planners, policymakers, all of us are aware that there could be some kind of a divergence. There could be some kind of a dichotomy between the things we plan and the way things turn out in actual practice. To cut a long story short, what America needs today is competitiveness, not higher tariffs. Shared prosperity depends on a more connected, secure, and efficient trading environment. The reasons for so called tariff terrorism, they are many and varied. I would just like to highlight a few, such as internal weaknesses of the American economy, such as asset monetization, lower crude prices, lower interest rates, a weaker dollar, and a resurgence in US manufacturing. Now, let me come to the meat of the topic, to something which is of greater concern to us. What is the debilitating impact, weakening impact on India? Immediately, as these tariffs came into force, the impact on the certain segments, certain sectors of the Indian economy was both immediate and debilitating. Textiles and apparel manufacturers in various pockets, diverse pockets such as Tirupur, Noida, and Surat, stopped production uh, because of their products became inherently uncompetitive in the global market, rapidly losing out to the rivals from Vietnam and Bangladesh. The products from these countries gave the Indian exporters a run for their money. Now, what I would like to stress here is that for decades, India and the US have collaborated to weave an intricate tapestry of trade, technology, defense, and diplomacy. Now, with one sweeping stroke, as under President Donald Trump, the fabric risks being torn apart. America has always been
Excuse me, sir. I think you got muted.
Is it okay?
Yes, yes, sir. You just missed the last few seconds of your lecture.
Okay. I did not. Maybe I am not. Okay, let's go on. We are facing a situation of what we call a seismic shift, in the sense that India has historically enjoyed a strong trade surplus with US. The US continues to be our one of the most important export partners, foreign trade partners, and about 40 of the total export destinations exports to US account for something like 17 to 18% of our total exports, spanning key sectors such as pharmaceuticals, textiles, IT services, gems and jewelry, engineering goods, and auto components. In this kind of a perspective, the 50% tariff drastically erodes the competitiveness of our products. Now, Indian exporters, already grappling with decelerating global demand and supply chain disruption, will face reduced orders, constricted margins, and imminent job losses. Export oriented sectors such as textiles and apparels, which are highly price sensitive, would be the worst hit. Now, reduced export revenues will also worsen India's current account balance, increasing pressure on the rupee and potentially raising imported inflation. We see in the last 1 2 days that the rupee has taken some kind of a tumble. It has fallen to an all-time low. So this was the broader macroeconomic picture. Let me try to do some kind of a disaggregated examination, a granular look at some of the major sectors which are likely to be hit in the wake of President Donald Trump's tariffs. Let me begin with agriculture. India's agriculture exports, such as rice, spices, and marine products, which find large markets in the US, will become less competitive. Farmers and small traders could face reduced incomes. Gems and jewelry. Now, this is an important sector, labor intensive sector in India, which employs about 5 million skilled and semi skilled workers. This could face severe demand compression, leading to retrenchments and layoffs on a wide scale. IT, information technology, and services. These may not be directly subject to tariffs, but this move signals an unfriendly trade stance which could spill over into restrictions on visas and outsourcing. Auto and engineering goods. Tariffs will erode India's competitiveness in these medium technology exports, threatening both manufacturing output and employment. Factories risk slowdowns, workers risk pink slips, and the Make in India vision that has taken some kind of a severe hit. Leather and footwear. Now, this is again a highly labor intensive, export oriented industry, and here our products may not be competitive once again because of competing countries like Vietnam and Indonesia. Pharmaceuticals, drugs and pharmaceuticals, Indian generics constitute lifeline for American households, but they will have to cede market share to rivals with more easier access to the American market. But the flip side of this is that the American consumers will also have to pay a higher price for these kinds of drugs and pharmaceuticals. One of our other important exports to the US is shrimp, and exports to the US will be hugely hit by global competitors such as Ecuador. Now, there is some kind of a tendency to look at this measure in relation to trade flows. But my submission here is our thesis is that this issue transcends, goes beyond, well beyond trade flows to dent, to severely impact jobs, incomes, and India's growth story. Exports worth US dollar 48 billion are directly in the line of fire. The knock-on effects on the rupee, inflation, and investor confidence will be considerable. Now, when you look at things from the perspective of the entire broader Indian macroeconomy, we find that India's trade deficit could widen by about 0.5%. GDP growth could get reduced by 0.3 to 0.5%, and the rupee may weaken. Now, all this could happen because of lower exports, factories running below capacity, exporters defaulting on loans, job losses, and reduced foreign exchange flows. So, there could also be some kind of a hit on foreign direct investment in export oriented industries as India's economy seems susceptible to Washington's mood swing. Now, this is not a very pretty picture to look at, but we have consistently argued that the bigger picture is not as gloomy as it appears on the surface because India's export base is diversified, its corporate earnings and inflation outlook remain intact, and domestic demand is robust enough to cushion the blow. What can India do, or what has India been doing? Now, it's still early days since these measures were announced, but in its first series of measures, countermeasures, India has announced dedicated outreach programs in 40 key markets, including the UK, Japan, and South Korea, to boost textile exports. This targeted push will also cover Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Poland, Canada, Mexico, Russia, Belgium, Turkey, UAE, and Australia. Now, let me come to some diplomatic and strategic dimensions. Now, as I said earlier, this kind of a harsh move of 50% tariff imposed on Indian products hampers. This has greatly weakened the Indo-US partnership, which has been strengthening in recent years in variety of areas such as defense cooperation, technology transfers, and Indo-Pacific collaboration. Accordingly, India has justifiably viewed these measures very adversely since it violates the WTO's World Trade Organization's principles of non discrimination and fair trade. Now, let me again highlight that this is not just a trade war, it is a test of trade, it is a test of trust. The Indo US relationship has been praised as the defining partnership of the 21st century. Defense collaboration, Indo Pacific efforts, and technology transfers are now all at risk. So, India could also make things difficult for America in certain areas by restricting imports of American whiskey or the iconic Harley Davidson motorcycle, other things. While these may hog the headlines, they may not be able to enough to level the playing field. So, where do we go from here? My submission is that our best response could be to diversify by strengthening trade relations with the European Union, Asian, African countries, Latin America, and by building domestic strength and resilience. Now, let me also highlight another important facet of this crucial aspect. US Trade Advisor Peter Navarro yesterday described Russia's ongoing war with Ukraine as Indian Prime Minister Modi's war. Now, this such kind of comments are both undiplomatic and nasty, and in the language of management, international relations, they amount to hitting below the belt. There, we must remember that there are no permanent friends in international relations. only permanent interest. And all countries are therefore free at perfect liberty to advance what they perceive as their national interest. What is also very interesting is we have written a detailed paper, but for the in view of the paucity of the time, I cannot go into full details. If someone has wishes, we can send him that paper also. But I'll just highlight that over the years, despite all the moral preaching and taking the high ground, US has sided with dictators, with authoritarian regimes all through the last few decades. The cases of President Deng in China, Cuba under Battiaste, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., immediately come to mind. I would also like to highlight that while criticizing India, and severely at that, the US still continues to buy rare earths from China and source critical inputs such as uranium and plutonium from Russia. Hence, this kind of a stand of singling out India is not only unjust but also uncharitable. To my mind, it's a classic case of kettle calling the pot black. Now, let me come to some kind of a strategic options and choices which we have in India at the moment. Sometimes it is held that the path of least resistance is the easiest to take. We may succumb to American pressure. But is this the right way to go about things? Certainly not. In my opinion, the answer has to be no, a no, clear no, a resounding no. So, how do we go about improving things? Maybe India's calibrated overtures, reviving dormant trade pacts, expanding digital and service exports, and enhancing rupee settlement frameworks have helped cushion the short term impact. Now, let me take you back to a little, some kind of an insight drawn from history. And history reveals, well, history is replete with examples across countries, across geographies, across time periods that crises often force countries to reinvent themselves. Yet, at this defining moment for India, the fundamental question remains whether in navigating this new high tariff environment, can India use this moment to accelerate Make in India, strengthen supply chains, and diversify export markets to bring about a paradigm shift? So, an element of this kind of a strategy could be to reduce India's dependence on Chinese inputs while avoiding overt conflict either with the US or China. Now, one of the basic things which we have to consider is that there has been some traction in some of India's flagship programs like PLI, Production Linked Incentive Schemes, Make in India, diversification into sunrise sectors. But manufacturing proportion to GDP is still continues to be unacceptably low. Hence, the runway to self reliance is long and steep. Accordingly, a broad spectrum strategy needs to be employed, focusing on broadening manufacturing, which seems to have stuck at 14% to GDP, supercharging PLIs, productivity linked incentives, and FTAs, free trade agreements with blocks of countries, simplifying tariffs and attracting capital, exercising diplomatic muscle by using back channels, creative negotiation, and coalition building at the WTO to make tariffs politically costly for Washington. The competitiveness of our products amidst geopolitical churn must now occupy center stage. The focus must shift from reaction to resilience, from tariff tinkering to long term trust building. There has been a great deal of pressure on India to provide critical access to market access in sectors such as dairy, agriculture, digital trade, and pharmaceuticals. But India has stood its ground resolutely because of the vulnerabilities and susceptibilities of the Indian economy, necessitating the protection of the interests of farmers and small businessmen. India has also consistently rejected the US's unilateral policy of take it or leave it. Things do not proceed in international relations, in strategy, diplomacy, in an unilateral manner of take it or leave it. There has always to be some element of give and take. There has always to be some element of negotiation. And this is how I think we have to go forward. Going forward, I must highlight that these are difficult times, but then we have weathered many difficult crises in the past. I'm reminded of a very famous Hindi number which says, "हम लाए हैं तूफान से कश्ती निकाल कर." So again, as one of the very famous English poets, P.B. Shelley wrote powerfully, "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" Similarly, in the Holy Bible, there is an important concept: "This too shall pass." So obviously, these are difficult times, but we should never lose hope. We should try all options which are available to us on the table, uh, focus on strengthening the Indian economy by its various sunrise segments, important strategically segments, building their strength and resilience so that we emerge much stronger in the days and years ahead. Now, let me just give you an interesting example of how the word crisis is looked at in China. What we call in English, uh, each word has a letter. For example, if I say the, the, there are three letters. Chinese language, these are not called letters, these are called characters. Same thing in Japanese language also. So the Chinese characters for crisis, it's very interesting. They are taken both as they represent both danger and an opportunity. So maybe there is a lesson in it for us that while this poses a formidable challenge for India, I'm in no way undermining the magnitude of the challenge that India faces today. But this is also an opportunity. People do not change when you give them an option. People change, nations change, countries change when there is no option. So perhaps if we have limited option on the table today, and therefore we must explore innovative, out of box measures. We must look at business process engineering. We must display a sense of never say die. And if we are able to do this in a coordinated and concerted manner, I'm sure we'll be able to meet the challenges of today and expectations of tomorrow in a manner which satisfies the Indian people and the Indian larger socio-economic system at this defining moment. I think we are close to 7:40, so I'll close here and I'd be happy to take any questions, any queries which you may have on this subject.
Thank you so much for the session, sir. I'm sure the students have learned a lot of new things and a lot of new insights about the impact of the tariffs. So, if anyone has any questions, they can just raise their hands and I'll give them permission to unmute their mic, or you can put it in the chat box. Um, so I'll just unmute Subhamita. Subhamita, you can ask your question now.
Hello, sir. This is Shubhomata. So the question I would have is, you said the US has always been a maker and shaker economy. How do you believe that these tariffs will affect this status that the US has held for so many years?
Oh, well, I don't know if you recall in my initial introductory observations, I referred to some work which makes an important distinction. The entire system of the capitalist economy, of a free trading mechanism, has been built on free trade. But now, in the last few years, there's been a concept of fair trade. So, some American scholars, some other people, some advisors to the US president himself thinks that they need to make some kind of a distinction between a fair trade and a free trade. So this also has some kind of a strong theoretical basis in in economics, but that was for a very limited period. I don't know if some of you study economics, particularly international trade, international relations. You will recall that we have an argument of what is called the infant industry argument. So the infant industry argument basically says when the country is not fully strong and resilient, when the industries are in an incipient stage, they are still growing. So at that kind of a difficult time, they may need some hand holding, they may need some kind of a support. But to use that kind of a basic thrust of an infant industry argument to the present position of America, that is quite uncalled for and that does not fit the bill. So, to my mind, these kind of arguments, these kind of distinctions between fair and free trade, they are not entirely valid and they need to be taken not with a pinch of salt, but with a sackful of salt. Thank you.
Now I'll just unmute Jessica. Jessica, you can go ahead and ask a question. So she has also sent the question in the chat. She has asked, what could we have done differently in the past to avoid being vulnerable and manipulated by external powers right now, like China and Brazil?
What could we have done differently? A lot of things. I think at the household level, at the level of the macroeconomy, at the level of there's a very important saying which has great relevance across levels. Never put all your eggs in one basket. If you study economics, if you study finance, if you study management, the same concept has been taken of the same concept of putting all your eggs in one basket has been taken to mean what is known as concentration risk. So we must avoid concentration risk at all costs. We must try to diversify across geographies, across countries, across products, pay greater attention to value addition, moving up the value chain, develop the strength and resilience of the Indian economy. In India, as it is, exports are not a very significant sector of the Indian economy. I think the exports account for something like 17% of India's total GDP. So going forward, maybe we could have avoided this kind of a concentration risk, paid greater attention to products and regions diversification, and attempted to move up the value chain. So these are some of the things, but it's always easy to be wise in hindsight. Looking at things retrospectively is always simpler. So maybe our planners and policymakers, they could have had their compulsions at that particular point of time when they took those kind of difficult decisions. But going forward, I think we must look at significantly reducing, scaling down concentration risk, expanding our reach across countries, across trade agreements, across geographies, across products, and significantly moving up the value chain while simultaneously pushing for the greater strength and resilience of the Indian market.
Now I'll just mute Adya. Adi, you can ask a question. Hello. All right. Himanshu, you can go ahead and ask your question. Hello. You can just type it in the chat if that's a problem.
Yeah, sure. But I'll be thankful if you could read out that question.
Yeah,
I'm
sure, sir. I'm just asking them to type it in the chat if they're not able to speak. His question is, how can tariff escalation by US affect India's small and medium enterprises?
very significantly, very adversely. Very important question. MSMEs have been an important growth trigger for the Indian economy. They have we have MSM. MSME stands for micro, small, medium enterprises. We have about 8,500 kind of product lines. They account for 40% of GDP, 40%, 35% of exports, largest contributor to Indian employment, next only to Indian agriculture. So, apart from agriculture, MSMEs are significantly dependent on exports. This kind of obnoxious tariff, exorbitant tariffs is going to severely push back the growth and development of MSMEs, particularly in some of the sectors which are highlighted: gems and jewelry, textiles and apparels, drugs and pharmaceuticals. These would take a greater hit.
Nilesh has a question that with Trump's tariffs now effective, what steps can policymakers and businesses in our country take to reduce their effect?
Several. Some of these measures are already underway. First, like I think if you have been watching the news or going through the last 3 4 days back, the government of India announced a significant reduction in the level of GST taxes. Taxes, goods and services tax, are covering almost the entire spectrum. So this will give some kind of a breathing space to these industries. Uh, as I said, we are entering into free trade agreements with the US, with the OPEC group, with Latin American countries, with African countries. We are also trying to develop the strength and resilience of the Indian market. So, but all these measures will take some time to bear fruit. So, in the intervening period, some segments of the Indian industry will certainly take a hit.
The next question we have is, we often talk about the effect of tariffs at a country level, but from an individual perspective, say for students like us aiming to work in global companies, how do such trade wars change career opportunities?
Well, I'm afraid I have no good news for students and people in the education. If you go to the US, maybe your H-1B visa will come up, maybe with a tougher immigration law, maybe with the rupee weakening, your parents are required to shell out much larger amount of money. You may not be able to reach the US shores because of tougher, much stricter immigration policy once you finish your courses. Because education in the US, uh, basically the three levels of education. Uh, India also similar situation exists, but in US it's more pronounced. At the top level, the quality of education, let us say in Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, Yale, is of an exceptionally high order. At the middle level, there are some universities, institutions of higher education, which are of something middle of the road. And at the lower end, uh, the institutions may not be all that good. But even in the middle of the road kind of
रहने दे,
institution,
ये मैं हैंडल कर रही हूँ। वो अच्छा था, इतना बढ़िया था वो।
So sorry for the disturbance, sir.
okay, so I'll go ahead. So, in some kind of a these things, you have to pay to, for example, US education to give you some kind of a ballpark figure for 1 year. If you do graduation, that could be for 3 or 4 years. If you do post graduation, that could vary from 1.5 to 2 years. So only the education field would run into something like 60,000 US dollars. Then you can add another 10,000 for a living expenses, food, and other things. So you end up paying something like 70,000 US dollars. And unless you get some kind of a free share, grant, scholarship by Indian standards, that is hell of a lot because you multiply 70,000 by 85 or 86, something like this. So, because of these Trump policies, Indians or foreigners also, once they finish their education, first it is difficult for you to reach the US shores now. Even if you get there, even if you have that kind of a quality education, you'll be asked to go back. So in India, we don't get those kind of salaries. So both you and your parents would be hard put to meet this kind of a loan repayment, which would have become necessary. Some of your parents may be thinking of taking education loans. So repaying that loans could become an issue.
So the next question we have is studied that developed countries often have greater access to developing countries' markets, while the reverse is often not true. In that context, do you think the tariffs imposed can ever be considered fair? One of the justifications given by the US for the tariffs is to reduce its debt and boost its industries back home.
Well, I'm not convinced if US has to import. That means at a more fundamental level, the US products are not competitive in terms of price, in terms of quality. So this is why there's been a great deal of concern in the US itself that by imposing these tariffs, but say Indian products will no longer be found on the shelves of the malls of the supermarket. So this would lead to a significant price spiral. Inflation will go up, the quality would be shoddy. So end consumers will end up paying both a higher price for a inferior goods. So this has caused some kind of a backlash even in the US. Oh, I'm reminded of William Shakespeare's famous lines in Merchant of Venice that mercy is twice blessed. It gives both the receiver and the giver. Here, it's the complete opposite. It is hurting both the US and the other countries. So, in game theory, we visualize various kinds of situation: win, lose, lose, lose. So, here, the kind of scenario which I visualize perhaps is a lose lose scenario all around us, including for the US.
So the next question we have is that you mentioned that tariff issue goes well beyond trade flows and can severely impact jobs, income, and India's growth story. Could you please elaborate on which specific sectors of employment in India you see as most vulnerable in the short term and which sectors might actually benefit from these disruptions?
Well, let me start from the reverse side. Which sectors will benefit? Difficult to say. But which sectors will take a hit? Gems and jewelry, IT and services, auto and engineering goods, textiles and apparels, leathers and footwear, drugs and pharmaceuticals, shrimps, MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprise. All this will take some kind of a hit.
The next question is that it was mentioned that India must move from reaction to resilience. For a student of economics, how would you advise us to analyze resilience? Should we measure it in terms of export diversification, FDI inflows, forex reserves, or something broader like institutional strength?
Well, some aspects you have highlighted yourself very well. Other things also, but at a broader level, you have highlighted export diversification, maybe closer coordination, collaboration with other trade blocs, more bilateral agreements. Apart from that, we could also develop the competitiveness, the pricing power of Indian products. India is itself a huge market, and this is here to stay and grow. So maybe we can focus on the Indian markets. So all these will constitute elements of a broad spectrum strategy. Things will not happen overnight, but I'm sure with coordinated and concerted attempts, with a sense of urgency, we can make a difference.
The next question we have is, what lessons should India learn from Trump's tariff policy for its future trade deals with the USA?
One obvious lesson which comes is that US has come out as a extremely unreliable partner. So the kind of faith and trust which was built with great deal of effort and painstaking efforts for the last 3 to 4 decades, cutting across party lines, Democratic, Republican, all those lies in tatters. So maybe, hopefully, things will improve. But even when they improve, maybe we may not be all that trustworthy. We may not have so much faith and reliance. So that has caused some kind of a long term damage to India US strategic, diplomatic, international relations.
For the next questions, I'm allowing mics for the students if they can unmute and ask.
Are most of you from North India or some South Indians are also there?
Sir, most of the students are from Delhi University, so I believe there must be some diversity in the student
Okay, I'll give you just one example where
body.
which just came to mind. How will Indian US relations pan out in the future? I don't know if some of these students would have seen the process of making curd. So उसमें एक बार आप पनीर बनाते हैं, दही बनाते हैं, नींबू डाल के, अगर दूध पुराना हो जाता है तो फट जाता है. एक बार दूध फट जाता है तो उसको वापस आप ठीक नहीं कर सकते. You have to go in for fresh kind of a milk. So something similar. This has been as I said initially, a sledgehammer effect on India and the Indian economy. So obviously we will need some time. It will take a lot of effort to rebuild the Indo-US relationship to the same level of acceptance.
Ashwina, I have allowed you to unmute. If you can please ask your question now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the session, sir. I just wanted to ask, you said that this was a lose-lose situation. So, first, why has Trump, like, why has America even done this? And secondly, now, what would the change be on India, China, or India Russia relations? Basically, India's relations with the BRICS nation because of this.
Well, there are several components to your question. It's a quite a comprehensive, wide-ranging, extensive in its sweep. Maybe let me attempt to answer some parts of it. One, as I said repeatedly, Trump is convinced. We feel wrongly, but in his mind, he's a man of his strong likes and dislikes, a man of conviction in the wrong sense. So he has built his entire thesis of this kind of a tariffs on what he calls a distinction between free trade and fair trade. I think I made that point repeatedly that the entire free market system, the entire capitalist system is based on free movement of goods, of services, of people. Now, this has caused some kind of a major disruption, some kind of a major vacuum. So this is one reason he thinks that by taking this kind of a shortcut, American industries will develop. But I gave you example from the days of 1929, 1930, Smooth Hawley tariff. I gave you the example of Cobra effect, that sometimes your intentions may be good, but the way it works in practice is not all that desirable. America has some strong competitors from China, from Russia, and India per force is going closer to China, closer to Russia. So obviously, in the long run, this will not good for America. But India does not have very many choices at this time, because in international politics, strategy, and diplomacy, we always say, and America also believes in this kind of a dictum, that my enemy's enemy is my friend. So if America and India are on adversarial terms today, terms of an adversary, and so is, let's say, Russia or China. So we may ipso facto come closer, and this will be to long term detriment of US.
Okay, the next question we have is, should India focus on diversifying its export markets? And if so, which countries and for which key products could India realistically build strong trade partnerships to reduce dependence on the US?
Yes, certainly. I think I made this point repeatedly. I think you mentioned two, three times, possibly three, four times. We have to diversify. There is no two ways about it, and we have been going about it at great pace, strengthening our India-England relationship, strengthening India-EU relationship, strengthening India's sorry, relationship with OPEC countries, with Arab countries, with Latin America, with Africa. We are also paying great attention to moving up the value chain on exporting products which have a more value added content in that. So all that is something like, this is something like a work in process. This will take some time, but ultimately it will be of great advantage in strengthening the resilience and the strength of the Indian economy.
The next question we have is, the Make in India campaign was launched by India during late 2014, and the MAGA ideology came into existence at 2016 in the electoral campaigns of Donald Trump. Is this an attempt of the US to mimic a developing country such as India?
No, I don't. That will be too much. But this PLIs, Make in India campaigns, these are theoretically very good. But if you look at the data is not all that good. So maybe some more, because as I said, I think I mentioned that also. They are basically, if you look at any economy, there are at the moment about roughly about 200 countries in the world, as per IMF, World Bank, OECD data set 190, 195. So a round figure you take as 200. So all economies are basically three sectors. One is agriculture and allied sectors, primary sector. Second is the manufacturing secondary sector. Third is the tertiary or the services sector. So in India, if you look at the position historically, in 1950s, agriculture and allied sector accounted for something like, 1950, it accounted for about 50%. That means, in other words, almost half of India's GDP. However, things have changed completely now, and now agriculture accounts for something like 15% of India's GDP. Services sector has become by far the most important sector of the Indian economy, with services accounting for by something like 63, 64% of the GDP. But the share of manufacturing in India had stuck at 14%. We are trying to move it to 22, 25%. But then, as I said, maybe there is some kind of a divergence between what we have planned and the way things are working out. Maybe there is a need for some kind of a course correction, some kind of a tweaking of these policies, operational guidelines, and their implementation, so that we have a more effective impetus provided to these key industries.
So another question we had was, what percentage of India's total trade has been impacted because of the 50% tariffs?
I think I answered, I made it clear in my introductory observation. 17% is India India's trade to US account for something like 17% of India's total trade basket. So all of that will not be at risk because some places America does not have an option. But then maybe a significant portion. So to cushion this kind of impact, we have a wide range of bilateral and multilateral agreements. We are trying to enter into closer coordination and coordination with countries, groups of countries to soften the blow.
Which relationship will benefit India most? India, US, or Indo China in the longer run?
I think these things are, this is an evolving situation. These things change from time to time at different historical points. I think I said in one of my, when we are talking of international strategy, diplomacy, I said all over the world, uh, countries never have permanent friends, they have permanent interest. So today, maybe we may be closer to China, we may be closer to Russia. At a different point of time, hopefully things could change. So we could be once again close to America. It's difficult to visualize. I'm not a soothsayer, I'm not an astrologer. So it is difficult to foresee how things will pan out. But I wish to drive one of the basic hard facts of life, international strategy, diplomacy is that there are no permanent friends, there are only permanent interests.
Ramona, I have unmuted your mic if you have a question, and if it's possible for you to unmute, please ask.
Or maybe we'll take two more questions.
Sure, sir.
Good evening, sir. This is Ramona, and my question to you is it's more sort of a recommendation from you as a person of expertise. I personally have interests in game theory, so if you could recommend me books or maybe like resources from which I could develop that aspect of my interest.
I read all that. There is a wide gap between your age and my age. I may be double or even more of your age. So I studied all those things long back. So at the moment, I'm not in a position to advise you any specific books or paper. I apologize, but I've been busy with a lot of other things. So I'm not in a position to give you any specific advice on this issue. I apologize.
It's okay, sir.
We'll take one last question from Shubhomita, and then the rest of you can reach out to Sir on LinkedIn then.
So I wanted to ask a question regarding to the stock market. So we is the investor trust in America and American institution dwindling with the implementation of these tariffs and Mr. Trump's actions against the Federal Reserve?
Stock market, which stock market you are referring to? The Indian or the US?
I'll be referring to the US stock market.
US, I don't have that kind of money. I don't dabble in the, but I'm told that since the industries will take a hit, consequently, all the American stock market is also likely to undergo some kind of a major battle because stock market historically does well. It's a function of aggregation of some of the leading industries, leading firms. So if inflation goes up, if the quality is not satisfactory, if these inventory piles up, their products are not being sold. So obviously, this will find some kind of a reflection, some kind of a manifestation in the pricing power which the stock market commands, and that could take a hit. The American stock market could also fall.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering so many questions and giving such an insightful lecture. On behalf of the entirety of the GAE organization, we were truly honored to have you here. And we hope the students also enjoyed the session and got all the answers that they needed. We hope to host you for future events, and we hope the students also join us future events. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining as well.
My pleasure. Thank you for being with all of you. Good night to all of you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.